Well, hello there, everyone. Here to show you the presents for the graduates calling activity right here. As you see right here, as I would hand you right here, is an example right here of for President Obama. And let's just say that it could be any U.S. president. It could be maybe your president like President Clinton or other top presidents. But on the other hand, knowing about for most of the time with most presidents though is that if we would think about when we would be going to the school and just thinking about yeah, well, how come the president can't teach us this subject? It is if most of us can remember about whenever we walk into the classroom and knowing about that they usually have something. The very first thing that more likely that most students would more likely do is that say the Pledge of Allegiance. It's like, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and then to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And knowing about, most kids are wondering about exactly about what does that mean necessarily. And I don't know what most parents would more likely say that knowing about represents, you say, the freedom for the country, and then for the country for what the national anthem stands for. And then some that may say that after the Civil War, that knowing about that's like a song to announce, is like to announce our freedom. And knowing about every day when we come to class is knowing about that before you turn in your homework, before you start whenever you see that a lot of times that if most of us can remember that when we were in school, is knowing about to represent the leader for our country, and as well as knowing that for the freedom. Though it's like we come to school and we get an education, right? Well, on the hand too, that knowing about that really some guys that may wonder that why is it that we had to hold our hands over our hearts, and a lot of times that we had to hold our this was the president, but why is it that we had to hold our hands over our hearts a lot of times? Really, I'm like, what does that necessarily mean when we hold our hands over our hearts, especially the gentlemen? If it could be that, and I know that even on my graduation that they even had it to where that they say that gentlemen, please place your caps over your hearts, and then they would sing the national anthem, and then it could be I think the Star Spangled Banner and then the national anthem. And if anybody were to ask, it's like, what's the difference between "Oh, say goes that Star Spangled Banner, yeah, way, and the land of the free, and the home of the brave"? But I can remember that that song. It would have been back in back in 1997, 99, something like that. If I can remember right. I'm trying to keep track of these years too, but after I heard about the incident, I think another the Columbine shooting, besides the Oklahoma City bombing, is that talk about right here is like from whenever we sing the national anthem too, whenever the gentlemen hold their hands over their hearts, and basically that I guess it's like a if it means for honor, for salute, or like the promise kept or something like that, then I'm thinking it's honor salute or something like that for represent freedom for the country, something like that. But anyway, but it kind of like goes like saying, anybody say it wonder that go with the flow, huh? But anyway, but the part about this activity right here is talking about if is like for the president though, is that if most of us wonder that I'm like, yeah, that you may listen to the president because the president of the United States of America, because he's the leader of the country, and knowing that really a lot of students, maybe millions, millions to maybe a trillion, like if anything, millions of kids would more likely like to meet the president of the United States, and so they're like, yeah, that well, you got a homework assignment that's due by Friday or by Monday next week, and then you got to get busy with it, that type of stuff, and like, well, I'll listen to the president, but I'm not going to listen to the teacher. I say that don't be that ornery now, but knowing about that there is a type of situation to where it comes to maybe if like that they say that you don't want it to involve the president, knowing about that with the president to encourage most children, and that knowing about with most kids though, if I just drew me right here, if this was a class of maybe 15 other students though, is it knowing about if this right here was me sitting at the desk right here, and knowing about I'm like, yeah, that And there was about a few other students too. I can go ahead and draw an example right here of a student, but right here just kind of draw a little bit of glance at the head right here. But anyway, got a girl, or so like if there was somebody else in the classroom as well. But knowing about that for who's all doing their work, and then knowing about, I'm like, yeah, do we all know about the president? The president of the United States of America is the first black president. Let's just say if the 45th president were to be a white president, but then one thing that we may not know about is knowing that that about the president, he don't have a college education, or maybe the fact about that he was a D student. A couple times he was a D student, or that he changed his major at least 6 times. Let's just say if we hear about that on the news, to where that a lot of students, whenever they go to school, that they try to keep one major, they have maybe about 8 different majors, and then it's like, well, the president of the United States, whenever he was growing up, that he changed his major at least 6 times. And then knowing about exactly, and now he's president of the United States, and they're like wondering that whenever I was growing up, that it could have been a story about that you had to be absolutely perfect just to enter the White House, that type of stuff. But let's just say that knowing about is that with our education, though, is that knowing about, if it goes by saying, it's like, for the video, is knowing about, like, really about the whole purpose about the whole thing about, it's like, goes by saying, like, by, our smartphones.
Today is election day, and you have the power to bring the change we need in this country. I can't do it by myself. This race will be close. That's why I need you to get out and vote today. Your polling location.
But other than that, like I talk about right here, is knowing about, if we were to be getting on our smartphones and then listen to the president's speech, especially on election time, is that knowing about, with most kids, knowing about, I'm like, yeah, well, the whole purpose about going out and voting, and they may say that, there's a right or wrong answer for who you want to run for president. If he's black or white, or if he's, and I can tell anybody here that a lot of times when I, encourage any, students, though, is that knowing about really that that besides passing a bill, though, it seems like a lot of times that we just want to kind of give the president a hard time, such as if he's got a half brother, or if he's if he's got a step family out there, or anything like that. I'm like that seems like a lot of times that anybody who's going to be what you call the leader of the country, that more likely that we're going to see some teases, such as that we may have heard before, is knowing about really that if he's a Muslim, and or something like that. And I don't know if I'm gonna, if I say that, yeah, if you want to go and prove by your own artwork, and knowing about the president, is knowing that really that anything to prove of knowing about if he's really if he was really born here in the United States, or if he's a Muslim. But on your hand too, that knowing about, I'm like, yeah, that if we were thinking about the name, for Hussein, and knowing about for Hussein, that for Barack Hussein Obama, and knowing about, I'm like, really that yeah, it's that name, in particular, knowing about, I'm like, yeah, that it's there are some names that more likely that seem like that looks kind of like a mustache, but the names in particular, knowing that there may be some names that more likely, if we ever have a president by the name of Tyden, of Tyden Mickerson, or something like that, President Tyden Mickerson. President Mickerson, and let's just say that if President Mickerson were to be like going to the schools and encourage most students, to get an education, that type of stuff. But knowing if it's going to be black or white, or it's like Hispanic, but on your hand, and knowing about with most presidents, though, is that it's like, yeah, that either way, whenever you're president, it seems like the people are pointing the finger at you either way, such as that, yeah, well, you didn't, your score wasn't that great, or you skipped the meeting, that was at 5 o'clock or something like that, anything like that. So far as talk about something that we call irresponsibility. But on the hand too, that knowing about is like if it's a Tyden Nickerson or something like, some president is knowing about really, like, I'm sure most Americans, they, or if it's Israeli, or South Africans, or whoever that's president, and knowing about, I'm like, really, that for the United States of America, that we may be wondering about when are we going to be getting a white president again, or when if we find out that we're going to be getting a female president. And a lot of the ways, the way I think about, though, is knowing about that, really, do we want a robot as a president? I'm like, a robot, a machine, and we don't really need a president in office that's half robot and half machine. But on the other hand, knowing about that, with the type of education, though, is that knowing about that the whole purpose about is like for most presidents, though, is that for presidents for graduate, knowing about whenever we show up for class. And I'm sure that most times, that with most students, they probably look forward to saying, it's like, yeah, that they go to school and they don't want to have to deal with a locker combination. You have right here's a locker, and I can, like from the president's speech, is knowing about. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure. I don't know about the president, but everybody's first year in middle school, if they, one of the things that they're worried about besides finding their classes is knowing about is like dealing with the locker combination. It's like knowing about with most locker combinations, though, is they have it right here. You have right here a lock, and then I got a blue lock, and then I got a red lock right here, like a red, type lock. And then, some of these locks, though, is knowing about, if we were to think about these locks, is that they would be worth, I would say, at least maybe sometimes between $5, to $8, to a couple of dollars, something like that, for these locks. And like on the back of them, that they have it to where that some of them that even have it to where that even the teachers would have like a key that goes in the back that unlocks the lock, but then the students are responsible for remembering the combination. And I don't know about the president, but let's just say that if the president, whenever he was growing up, is knowing about, I'm like, yeah, that for their first year, maybe the first year in office, and then your first year at school, is knowing about one thing that maybe that they probably think about is that knowing about trying to figure out a locker combination, and knowing about what these these combinations, though, is that the lockers are pretty much used to keep your stuff, your school stuff, safe and books organized, that type of stuff. And some students that which I know that back whenever I was going to middle school, that some students that may say that it's like their own personal space to where that if they want to have put posters up on the walls on the inside or anything like that, or maybe store like if it's maybe their personal notepad or something, notebook, their own personal notebook about that, for what they're doing after class, that type of stuff that they may keep in their lockers. But on the hand too, that knowing about that, then they would have their rules about that, a faculty member would in the school would have a key to every locker, that they would check the lockers just to make sure. But about the rules about that. But on the other hand, and knowing about, I'm like, with most of the time with lockers, with locks, though, is that knowing about that with these locks, that understanding about how to unlock them, and then let's say turn it from the left to the right, one full turn to the right and stop at a certain number, that type of stuff. And these two locks that I have right here, I got a silver one, but which are pretty heavy, though. I would say that they're at least 18 ounces, something like that. It's like maybe 4 ounces. I would probably say that they're quite a bit heavy, but anyway, you have right here's a lock, and knowing about what the president would more likely say about if that knowing about for students first year middle school, and knowing about understanding their locks, and knowing about between going from elementary school to middle school and high school, and maybe not everybody's going to have a locker, but if you have one, and knowing that that they're used to bringing their book bags and hanging their book bags up on on the racks in the classroom, but then like in the middle school that they would assign like a locker. And my first year in middle school, and I can tell anybody here that my first year in middle school, and I can remember that that they would give you the locker combination. They would tell you to go ahead and go out in the hallway and practice. And then I can remember that I remember once or twice I had a share locker, but then one year I had my own locker. And I can remember that not really about that, oh, the locker's not big enough, but a lot of it was about, I'm trying to get my locker open. So, and anybody like to say about the president, though, is knowing about, encourage any kids that's knowing about that that they get teased a lot, maybe because that they can't figure out a locker combination. And that knowing about that if it's like with most education, though, that if we were to be coming to school and maybe trying to memorize our times tables and maybe how to write our own name and knowing how to work at the mathematical future, for calculus, or if it's understanding about history, or if it's anything to do with that, the three basic rights, that type of stuff. But on the hand, and knowing about is like understanding about the locker combination right here, and knowing about that if they assigned you a combination, and just knowing about I think I'll go ahead and try to memorize my times tables other than to try to figure out the lock. But it's like, well, it's not that hard knowing about really. Just how can we describe unlocking a lock? And knowing about if we want to go ahead and try to think about, it's like try to memorize the time zones. It's like between Central Time and Eastern Time and Western Time, such as if it's going to be the South Coast or maybe the Mountain Coast time, if there's going to be a state that's about 3 hours ahead of us, and knowing about what time do you think it would be up there in Minnesota, or maybe in parts of California and Florida, that type, those states. And knowing about is like, well, like all you have to do is just turn it like here, and then turn it like right here, and then back like that. And I'm like, yeah, well, I don't want to mess with the lock, but I bought these locks, of course, just to kind of check out, because I can tell anybody here that I did not, I wanted a locker on my senior year in high school, and I could not get one because they said it's like, that you waited too long, or, if you really desperately needed one. And from those 3 years, from my sophomore, junior, and senior year, that they said that, if you don't need one, then don't worry about one. But I got these locks, I've unlocked them before, and I had the locker combinations. And as you say, that if you're going to be using a locker, though, is knowing to keep your stuff safe, though. But on the other hand, knowing about, like you say, that knowing about, with the president, though, with the president, that a lot of times about the president's responsibility, knowing about, for what goes on in the country as well as along with the students, though. But if this was right here, was me right here, and knowing about with me that if I were to be studying, and then next thing you know, it's like that something goes on in school, and then your students are around me, and then knowing about don't understand something, and you say that, I'll go and listen to the president. Had the president, a tutor, had the president tutor me, or what about the the principal? I didn't say the principal, I said the president. Well, if anybody were to think about going, if they were to, I don't know if they have too many schools up there towards the Washington, D.C. area, but let's just say for whoever that's teaching, if it could be a experienced educational teacher, and just knowing about for most presidents, though, is that really about most presidents that for President Obama, that knowing about a lot of things about between between if there's a president, say Todd Mickerson, or if it's any other president, that knowing about that with most presidents, that they encourage most students to succeed, to make good grades, that type of stuff. But on the other hand, too, to write the vote, and I'm sure they say that that if you're going to be in middle school, between the age of 14 and 16, that they say that they don't apply to you. But on your hand, and knowing about that, for what do you do? What do you tell the kids? And knowing about you have to be 18 years older, in order to vote. But they may change it, to 17. You must be at least 17 and a half, to vote. But on your hand, I can remember seeing those polling places, especially up there at the schools, to where that people go in there and vote, and of course, for any registered voters, knowing about that, it seems like if you're going to be a registered voter, it seems like that, only at the time, it kind of gives you it seems like it kind of gives you the experience to where that they ask you questions and, participate in that, for if it's health insurance or if it's jobs or anything like that, and knowing about that really, that, Congress is going to do what they're going to do. I don't make the rules to where I say yes or no, or I vote Proposition B or C about how our tax money needs to be used or something like that. But on the hand, too, for the presidents, for the graduates, is knowing about, it's like, really, do we have control over what we want to major in, and, for what we want to vote for? Knowing about that, nearly 20% of the answer is more likely, yes. I'm like that there are some things that more likely that are recommended, and they say that, just because like college students and then other students is that knowing about that they go to school, to get an education, and knowing about that they may not have control over what they want to learn and what they want to do, but then on their hand too, that knowing about it's like, yeah, that like I mentioned before, is like, you go to school and I guess you gotta follow the requirements, by the schools, and knowing about that if anybody were to say, like, ask the president that with the president, the president of the United States of America may have gone with the college, gotten his law degree or the type of degree that he does have, and knowing about and answer that, if you want to ask a lot of students, there would probably be thousands of students that may be asking that question to her, that why is it that I'm responsible for the out-of-pocket expenses, especially that they want me to take a subject that I never took at all, and I don't understand what they're trying to teach me, that type of stuff. But on the other hand too, that knowing about, I guess the best answer is more likely that with the president, though, if they're black or white, or if they are known as like maybe a president with maybe bright eyebrows, or if it's like it would say a president with a mustache or anything like that. And knowing about with most of the time with most presidents, though, is that really that knowing with these presidents that for whenever we go to school, though, that for whatever that they teach you, though, that they say that that whenever you pass, so that more likely that you'll be getting your degree in and on your hand, and knowing about there may be a lot of things that maybe that the classes that you take that more likely could improve your skills, and we may not realize it either, such as that while we are going to school and just knowing about the things that we don't understand. And with those things that we don't understand, that knowing about, I'm like, yeah, that I don't understand that this typographic synonym or something like that, or I don't understand about the lyrics or something like that. And whenever you don't understand it, and then knowing about that's whenever that the student just kind of wants to set it to the side, that type of stuff. But really, that I can tell anybody here, I didn't set the lock to the side. This lock right here, I'm like, yeah, I figure out the combination, and it's something that yeah, you don't have to use it every day, but let's just say at some point if you do use this lock, and knowing about, I'm like, really, that whenever you do figure out the lock or combination, and knowing about, I'm like, really, that anybody who more likely that's going to need to use a lock, and it'd be like, yeah, well, you need to make all A's. You can borrow this lock, but you need to make all A's in school. You can't just go to school and expect to where they say that, yeah, you were at the cookie factory, but then you were supposed to be at school, but then instead you went to the cookie factory, that type of stuff. And memorizing times tables, and I can tell anybody here, I guess it happens to where with most students, to where that they have their mind focused a lot of times on something, and then they takes their attention away from something else. But one thing we can also understand too, that knowing about with our education, is knowing about that we may be surprised from what we do remember, and then what we can do after we do take a class, and knowing about for how much it costs. And for most time with most presidents, though, they like that if there's going to be a president that's going to come to a classroom and start talking about a few things, such as I can remember that there was a firefighter and then a few other people that came to school and to talk to the students about I think a few doctors, and then I think psychologists or something like that. I'm trying to remember all these people that came to the school and talked to the students, but one of those, if one of those visits could be the President of the United States of America, then I'm sure they say that the parents and then the students are going to say that they're going to come to school. Yeah, let's come to school. I want to meet the President of the United States of America. But then on your hand, and knowing about, I'm like, yeah, that whenever if we would be walking in the same room with the President, and at the time the students are going to probably say that you're going to be really nervous, about being around the President, because knowing about with the President that you want to show the best of behavior, stuff like that. You want it to be good, but then, whenever the president leaves, something like that. But whenever the president leaves, and that's whenever that knowing about that, somebody says that they're going to do their work and then they don't do it later on, that type of stuff. Or they do it, but then they may not make that good of a grade, that type of stuff. But on hand to knowing about for president for the graduate is knowing that that yeah, you know, if we're going to begin a surprise visitor such as the President of the United States of America, and then knowing about that that you know, they say to be on your best behavior, and then by the time the president leaves, and it's like, well, you know, I don't want to do my work, or you know, I don't understand this, but yeah, I can tell anybody here that whenever I was in middle school, that that could be, like I mentioned before, that could maybe be reasons to why that I was moved to special education classes, and knowing about, you know, what does the president think about that? Is knowing about with most students who have a disability, you know, who have you know, managed to where that they gotten a lot of their education by you know, in a special needs class. And more likely, they could probably say that, you know, yeah, that you know, like I mean, you know, thought about before, that with special needs that the work is easier. But let's just say if you're doing a presentation talking about somebody, such as maybe if it's Christopher Columbus or if it's the president, and then knowing about exactly about that, you know, hey, that that, well, you know, you were homeschooled or you're special ed, you don't qualify to be in this level of skill in this classroom. But on the hand, and knowing about Mike, really, that you like sign your name, and knowing about, like you say, that knowing about really that there may be some type of skills that more likely somebody that may have as well, and more likely they do have it, such as reading and writing and understanding, and then for the most part is knowing about really that, you know, we may listen to the president, but then on the hand too, but then we may not listen to the teacher at times. But encourage anybody knowing about, like, really about, you know, if it's the president, you know, if we're going for the, you know, for the 44th or for the 45th president, is knowing about really that we may say it to where that well, the president don't even have his degree, but then on your hand too, and knowing about really, well, more likely maybe he does, or knowing about whatever type of degree that somebody has, if it's going to be the president of the United States, is knowing about, you know, for what, you know, how he presents the country as well. But knowing about the whole purpose about is like understanding about the presidents for the graduates, is knowing about we go to school and go to work for an education, and knowing about really about, you know, if we hear about that to where judge about the president, about, you know, people think that, you know, yeah, that you know, he came to this country, you know, but then how was he elected president? And knowing like well, on the hand, and knowing about really how was he elected president, and knowing about, you know, from how hard work, you know, for the campaigning, and as well as, you know, any students that may wonder though that really about, you know, how did you get approved a loan, huh? How did you get approved a loan, and how did you get approved a loan, and then how did you get a license to be able to teach you this certain skill? And I was like, really, does it all have to be earned, or do you just have to say by saying please? I'm like, you know, you don't. We all know by now that a lot of times it don't work that way. Most of the time it don't, to where you just say please and they'll give it to you. It's got to be earned. So it's like knowing about for the hard work and skill, knowing about for the presidents for education, you know, for the graduates, is knowing about, understanding about, is like that really about work hard, do our best, you know, that type of stuff. But other than that, it's all say for the presidents, for the graduates, say collect activity.